Greetings, Otaku Faithful. Thank you for joining me again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you yet again another ThunderCats episode review right here on Otaku Assemble! Weekly. As always, I'm here to bring you the latest in this week's ThunderCats episode review. So, this is Season 1, Episode 19, entitled The Pit, and in this week's episode, Lionel and the ThunderCats travel to a desert city where the major attraction there is the Pit. The Pit is a perpetual gladiator ring where slaves are forced to fight against one another in order to win their freedom. Throughout the course of the episode, we get introduced to Pumera, who is a fellow Thundercat, and she is currently a slave competing in the Pit. We also get introduced to Dobo, who is I believe he is a jackal. I forget the exact species of dog that is indigenous to the Egyptian desert North African region that the character is inspired by. But Dobo is he is the one in charge of running the Pit. He was a former slave, former gladiator who became the head of the organization, and he is also a former comrade of Panthro. We learned in this week's episode that Panthro actually competed in the Pit when he was a prisoner of war, and so him and Dobo they fought alongside each other in order to win their freedom. However, what happened in that situation was that when Panthro learned that he would have to face off against Dobo in a death match, he escaped, leaving Dobo there on his own. And on the flip side of that, Dobo thought that Panthro was abandoning him, and not only did Panthro not take him with him, but he also left him alone to face all the enemies that they had acquired while fighting together in the Pit. So now Dobo, being the head of the organization and of course being confronted by Panthro and the rest of the team when they ask about Pumera, he offers a wager. After Lionel tries to speak with Pumera, when he finds out that of course she can't stand his guts, and Dobo catches Lionel in the act, he decides to make a deal. If Lionel can defeat Pumera in the Pit, then they will both go free. Otherwise Lionel would have to remain in the Pit. Since I know I just went into the Panthro backstory, I also want to discuss the whole Pumera backstory, because we learned that apparently, okay, here's the thing, this is what has me interested about this character, because when I first heard about her and when we first got introduced to her, I was under the impression that she had been in the Pit, that she had been there for a while. Apparently not. Apparently she was in Thundera when it fell, and she was one of the ThunderCats that was kind of left behind, if you will. She stayed home, but however, due to all of the actions and all of the events that took place after the fall of Thundera, that's when she left, and so she winded up in the Pit. But I thought it was very interesting to find out her perception of Lionel and the rest of the ThunderCats. Pumera has an animosity towards Lionel because she feels as if Lionel and the ThunderCats, much like how Dobo feels about Panthro, abandoned Thundera and its people. She felt that, Lionel is a weak leader, and because of that, and because she views Lionel leaving as him running away. And so that, combined with her perception of him being weak, she thinks that, he is somewhat responsible for why Thundera fell. And of course she holds that against him, because in her eyes she feels like he hasn't done what needed to be done in order to help the people of Thundera during the reconstruction and the restoration. Now, I will say this. I thought, okay, both Pumera's story and Panthro's story. And Dobo's story. I thought both of those were very interesting, and I'll tell you why. Because both those stories give us exposition about information that we did not know. We know about Panthro that he's traveled Third Earth. You know, he's been all over. We first learned about that in the episode Old Friends when he was talking about him and Groom. So we know he's been all over. What we didn't know was, we still don't know what all Panthro has done. So to find out that Panthro was, you know, at the pit and that he made friends and, you know, his history with Dobo, it provides exposition about Panthro, about his history, and more about who he is as a character. Remember, Panthro is a general, and he is the type of person where he values his comrades. We saw that with Groom. That was the whole thing between him and Groom, because Groom was a brother and Groom turned against him. So we see that also with his relationship with Dobo. And then the thing with Pumera, which I really thought was interesting, was that we have not been to Thundera since the second episode. And so this is the first time that we find out what's been going on there since Thundera fell. What Pumera provides is that information for us through her animosity with Lionel, and through her experiences. We are beginning to learn what has happened to the rest of the cats. So I thought that was also interesting. The Wily Kit and Wily Cat side story with them, and what was the name of the raccoon? Pickpocket. I think it was You Took It. Yeah. I thought it was very funny. I thought it provided a lot of much needed lighthearted humor to the episode. Well, okay, let me rephrase that, because I said much needed. Let me rephrase that. I thought it provided lighthearted humor to the episode, but I'm not sure if it was needed in the context of this episode. Let me explain to you what I mean. Because of the severe nature of the events that take place in this episode, I felt like I said, the Wily Kid, Wily Cat side story was meant for humor, and it worked. But I'm not sure if I personally, I'm not sure if I would have preferred that in this episode. Another thing I want to address is the cliffhanger from this episode that is going to lead into next week's episode. We find out at the end of this episode that Pumera was not alone, that there were actually other cats that she was with, and they were enslaved and taken to a mine in, what was the name of it? It was hang on a minute, because the mine that they are at has a funny name, which is a play on a word. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but Lionel has kind of gotten into the thing now, okay, first with Pumera, and now that he knows that there are other cats nearby who are enslaved, of course, he wants to free them. And so I think what's going to happen is that next episode, we're actually going to go to the mine, we're going to find the other ThunderCats, and of course, they're going to get freed. The reason why I bring this up in this review is because I want to make this comment. A lot of you all have noticed, a lot of you all have actually commented to me when I discussed, you know, all of my problems with the series, where you mentioned that perhaps it is the time limit that is working as a disadvantage for this series, which I wholeheartedly agree. I think the main reason why the premiere was so successful was because it was the first 2 episodes shown as a 1-hour special, so it felt like an hour episode. It's very hard when you're doing an episodic series where every episode is a standalone story. It's very hard to establish a beginning, middle, and end when you only have 24 minutes to work with. Not many animated series are successful at doing that. The only one off the top of my head that I thought was hugely successful at that was Batman the Animated Series. I mean, what Bruce Timm and Paul Dini were able to do in 24 minutes with some of those episodes was spectacular. a lot of other animated series, what they usually do is they always have things carry on into the next episode. And so the whole point I'm bringing this up is because personally, I would have preferred for this episode and for the next episode to be shown as like a two-parter. I personally think that if they were to do more two-parter or three-parter or so on and so forth episodes, I think it would help. I think because they have some really good ideas. Like I said, the main problem with the ThunderCats series as far as the writing goes, it's not for lack of ideas, it's for lack of execution. I think they have some really good concepts, but they have a very hard time at implementing them. I think if they were to start, like I say, they don't have to do hour-long episodes, but I think if they were to start doing like two-parter and three-parter, where instead of it just being a story and episode, you have a little arc with a couple of episodes, much like how the original Justice League cartoon, the first two seasons of Justice League, how that was, where it's like two-parter, three-parter. I think this series would benefit hugely from that. I think it would actually work so much more in their favor than what's going on right now. Like I said, this was a good episode. It actually was. But if we could have seen this episode with next week's potential episode as an hour, I think it could have been so much better. I think it would have opened up the door to some really interesting things that they could have done as far as character development, as far as background story, and as far as establishing characters who very well could remain a major part of the story from now on. So that's pretty much my thoughts on this week's episode. Like I said, it was good, but of course there are always rooms for improvement. I'm actually looking forward to next week's episode. And so with that being said, I'm going to wrap up this review. This has been Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief. I'm signing off, and until next time, peace.